Our scripture this morning from the Gospel of Luke, just one verse from the 23rd chapter, Luke chapter 23, verse 26. Luke 23, 26. As the soldiers led him, Jesus, away, they seized Simon from Cyrene, who was on his way in from the country. And they put the cross on him, and they made him carry it behind Jesus. And this is the word of God.
Thanks be to God.
You know, that mentality of service and dedication and devotion that is exhibited in veterans comes out really when our nation has ever been in need. It was a sign of that great generation that is dwindling now, not many of them left, that signed up in droves to help us to attain victory in World War II, who saw the need and saw the threat and dedicated themselves and their lives to defeating that threat. But really since then we've kind of seen a sea change that kind of started with the Korean War and got full-blown during the Vietnam War, where the nation was divided over, just war theories and the reason for war. And we didn't see that mentality again until after 9/11. And after we were made evident of a threat on our own shores once again, we saw that same kind of resurgence in volunteers for the armed forces. But also, in the midst of that, I can remember back when the Gulf War started and some of our first troops were deployed, there were people complaining. Some soldiers and even parents were saying, we didn't enlist for this. We didn't sign up for this. We wanted a good education and some training. And I understand, the discrepancies there. If you enlist during a conflict, you know what to expect. If you enlist in the midst of a conflict, you're going to the front lines. You go into it fully prepared, and you go into it fully committed. But people who enlist during peacetime, the motivation can be a little bit different. It's a good way to have a career. It's a good way to get some training, maybe get some education, or just have a job. Maybe the mines are laying off and the factories are shut down and there's not too many options, so the military makes a good one. But even if you enlist during peacetime, it's still the military, right? There's still a chance you're going to see combat. And so you should understand that going into it. But really, that's just kind of the way life is sometimes, isn't it? We quite often get called to tasks that we didn't anticipate. We often get engaged in things that we really didn't sign up for and throw our hand up for. And that's the way it was for Simon. Now, Simon was a devout follower of God. He had traveled all the way from Cyrene for that once-in-a-lifetime vacation experience. To spend the Passover in the Holy Land, the dream of every faithful Jew to at least once in their life spend the Passover in David's holy city, in the city of Jerusalem. And so it's kind of like a trip to Disneyland with a religious focus. Perhaps he saved for years and planned for months, And he bought the entire package. The food, the lodging, and the entertainment. The entertainment this year was a crucifixion. 3 men, 2 thieves, and some political criminal. The streets there were packed in that city, and excitement filled the air. And as he walked into the city, he could feel it. But it wasn't the excitement of the religious fervor that was going on. What he felt was the cold steel of a centurion's spear tapping him on the back of the shoulder. And he stopped and he turned to see a Roman centurion who was drafting him into service. And that centurion was leading a grisly figure who had collapsed under the weight of the beam of a cross. And now that centurion was instructing Simon to carry that bloody cross. I mean, think about Simon. I mean, all the way from Cyrene for this. To spend Passover carrying the cross of a criminal. He had come there to worship God, not to be part of a Roman execution proceedings. And now, this would make him unclean and unable to really fully participate in the Jewish celebration of Passover. And from the looks of it, it was really just a waste of time. For that man that had collapsed under the weight of the beam was nearly dead anyway. I mean, why bother? Just let him die in the street and let Simon go about his life. Leave him laying there and let Simon go about his celebration and his plans and his weekend. Because he didn't sign up for this. And as he bent down to lift that blood-soaked beam, he remembered just how much he really hated the Romans, who came and exerted their rule over God's nation and God's people. The Jews had one Lord, and that was Yahweh, not Caesar. And the Romans were ruining it all. You know, if only the Messiah would come and put an end to all this. Maybe he shall, for it is the Passover. There is no better time for God to act. But the nudge of that spear brings him back to reality and pushes him onward. And they drive him back outside the city that he had planned to come to all of his life. They drive him out carrying that beam, and he strains under the weight, but he finally makes it. And when he gets there to that hill called Golgotha, he throws the beam down, and they can make him carry the cross, but they can't make him stay and watch their sick little spectacle. But there's something about what's going on here. There's something about this man that could not carry his own cross. They say he's a political criminal, but he has no followers. There's no cries for revolution, just hate-filled onlookers and a small group of women sobbing quietly. And other than that, he dies alone. And Simon can't leave. He stays there until that man breathes his last breath, until he dies. And when he dies, it seems the entire world has changed. Even that centurion can sense it. And the one who instituted the death is changed by that death, saying, surely this man was the Son of God. And when he dies, as I said, the whole world did change. But most importantly, so did Simon. In the Gospel of Mark gives us a little hint to that change. He says that Simon was the father of Rufus and Alexander. Now, y'all know Rufus and Alexander, don't you? Well, apparently, Mark's readers did. Apparently, they were individuals who were familiar to that early church. Apparently, they were active in that church. People obviously known to the readers, which is why Mark includes them as he writes to that community of faith. And most people believe this is the same Simon that is spoken of in the book of Acts. And the point is, before that Passover and before that drafting, Simon was not a Christian. He was not a follower of Jesus. But all of that changed. That event changed Simon so much that his children and his family and his life and his faith were impacted. And that's the point of this one little verse in every gospel. All the synoptic authors tell us about Simon carrying the cross, and it's not to show us how badly Jesus was beaten during the scourging. It's not to show us how weak he was before he ever got to that hill. It was to give us an example of what it means to be a follower of that individual who died on our behalf. And it puts meaning to that statement of Jesus, who said that anybody who wants to come after me has got to take up my cross and follow me. Simon had plans. But after his encounter with the crucified one, his plans had changed. And when Simon picked up that cross, he laid down his life. And that's the point. If you truly follow Jesus and you truly take up the cross, your life is changed. Because the cross isn't a chance encounter on the road of life. The call to follow Christ is meant to be an interruption in our life. It's not just a casual addition to life as we know it, but a new agenda, a new destination, a new purpose, a new goal, a new motivation. Dietrich Bonhoeffer describes the call of Christ to be aware only of Christ and no more of yourself. For Jesus bids you to come and die to yourself in order that you might live for Him. Paul says, "For this you were called, because Christ suffered for us, leaving an example to follow in His steps." Simon is that example. That's why I get so surprised to hear people who committed themselves to following a crucified Lord, who laid down His life that we could find life, who calls us to follow His example of taking up the cross, saying, "I didn't sign up for this." I was talking to a dear friend of mine, a fellow pastor, and we were talking about, the joy of the church at nominating time, trying to get people to fill positions. And he said, "Where would we be if Jesus had the attitude of the majority of most Christians in our church? This cross? I really don't feel called to do that right now. Maybe next year." I love the way we use religious language for our excuses too. I really don't feel called to do that, or mature in my faith, or whatever. Where would we be if Jesus had that attitude? So the question is, when you answered the call to follow Christ, what did you sign up for? Maybe a nice little social club. Good place to have fellowship dinners and activities. A dedicated place to spend an hour a week when it's convenient. Or was it a commitment of life? Was it a dedication of service? Was it a dying to self and a sacrifice for others? A transformation of life? And did we give all of our life, or just a part of it, just a portion? If you're really willing to look upon the suffering of Christ on your behalf, and you're really willing to feel the weight of the beam upon your own shoulder, and you understand it as a calling, as an interruption in our plans as well. Because the call to follow Christ is a total redirection of our life. So has Christ interrupted your life? And are you ready to take up the cross and follow Him? Let's turn to our hymn of invitation. 556, Trust and Obey. We'll stand and sing the first two verses as we ponder that question. Has Christ really interrupted your life? Are you bearing the cross daily? You need some help along the way. If so, God is here, Spirit, to strengthen you. He's calling you to a decision of faith. Share it with us as we stand and sing 1 and 2, 556, Trust and Obey.